Hello, I'm TD Desso.
And I'm Ron Rucker.
Welcome to the Connecting Theology podcast, live from Fishbowl Studios.
The Connecting Theology podcast is presented by the Warren Theological Foundation.
Our mission is to bring together broad theological perspective on contemporary issues for the benefit of the church and the academy. The foundation disseminates quality theological content in two forms: our podcast and our quarterly academic journal, the Warren Journal of Theology. Subscribe or donate at our website, WarrenTheology.org.
Thank you to our listeners from all over the world. Thank you to our sponsors and partners for making this possible. The Dallas Bible Theological Institute, you can visit their website at dbti.org, the Urban Christian Writers Guild, and the Westmount Moriah Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas. To become a sponsor or donor, visit our website at WarrenTheology.org.
And if you are a writer, if you do academic writing in the area of theology, we welcome papers to be published in our quarterly journal. Again, go to our website, WarrenTheology.org, for more info. If you're watching this on Facebook, those links should be there in the description of the video. All right, now, today we are so excited to have as our guest Dr. Leon Moore, the president of Dallas Bible Theological Institute. Dr. Moore has also been a contributor to the Warren Journal of Theology twice now. He was a contributor in our very first issue back in June of 2022, and he is a contributor in our latest issue, which is Volume 2, Number 4, which completes our second year of publication. So, thank you, Dr. Moore, so much for being here. We're glad that you are our guest. Our primary question today is, how does society's distrust in institutions contribute to the decline in the Church of America? And the title of today's show is Rejection of Institutions and the Health of the Church. We have with us someone who is well versed in this subject matter. Before we jump into our discussion, I do want to read to you his bio.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Moore is the president of Dallas Bible Theological Institute. He has over 35 years of working experience in pastoral, church, and marketplace ministries. He is certified with the Society for Church Consulting and is a certified church administrator through the Church Network. He has written a handbook on church administration titled Developing a Ministry Administrative Plan, MAP. He serves as a church revitalization specialist with the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. Dr. Moore received his doctorate of ministry, a Master of Arts from Dallas Theological Seminary, an MBA from the University of Minnesota, and BS, a Bachelor of Science from Alcorn State University. He is married to Joyce Moore, and they are proud parents of 2 daughters and 1 son-in-law. And one more thing to add to that, I consider, Dr. Rucker and I consider Dr. Moore a friend.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Yes, sir.
Glad to be here.
All right, let's jump right into our discussion for today.
Okay.
Dr. Rucker.
Doc, we got some great questions for you, and I'm looking forward to the. You always come with such smooth flowing answers, informative answers. So I'm looking forward to the answers today, or the responses. Our first question today is, in your estimation, what category does church revitalization fall in? Is it more like a strategic plan or a spiritual focus?
Well, when I think of, thank you, Dr. Rucker and Brother Terry for inviting me here today. And yes, on this topic of church revitalization, when you're thinking about church revitalization, first of all, we have to find what is it.
Okay.
And when you look at our local churches today, they can go through several stages, just like we grow. When you plant a church, that's the birth of the church. Now, what does that church does over the life? For example, its strategies. How does it do ministries according to God's plan? And I'm a firm believer that God's plan is embedded in the Great Commission, which says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost." And if you look at that scripture, there are a lot of processes in there that the church has to work through to fulfill that requirement that Jesus Christ gave the disciples, that empowerment in which we have today. And so when you ask the question, how does church revitalization fall within a strategic plan? So church revitalization is, you can start off, you think of it like a bell curve. It's sort of like you start off, you growing, then you plateau out, and you don't do the things that you normally do at church. The ministries that you did in the past, you don't do anymore, and they're dropping off. So you plateau out and you decline. So the goal is the church is to go forward. Now, saying that, if I was to define it, church revitalization requires a strategic plan with a spiritual focus.
Okay.
So you have to plan, but you have to plan with God in mind.
Okay.
To move it along.
Okay. I like that. Good answer. I like it. With that being said, how do you know if a church is in need of revitalization? And let me caveat, let me add something else to that. If the church, the leaders, if everything's happened, and like you said, with a focus on God, right? And we're focusing on God, and we're doing what we're supposed to. My question is, how do you know if a church is in need of revitalization? But if we're doing what we're supposed to, why would it need to be revitalized? Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, that's a good question when you're talking about why does it need to be revitalized. Well, it's sort of like a report card. If you're doing your homework, you're getting good grades, it doesn't need to be revitalized. That's a sign of good health.
Right.
The church is, when we talk about revitalization, we're talking about you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're declining. So you're needing to find out, are we witnessing more in our communities? Are we teaching the people the Bible?
Okay.
And so when we talk about revitalization, it's sort of where you have plateaued out and you are declining. In other words, you hear certain things that, well, we used to do this back in the day, we don't do it anymore.
Okay.
Or you will see some churches that used to have probably 200 or 300 cars in the parking lot. Now you go by and they may have about 20 and 25. That's a sign of something that has happened in that church.
Okay.
And so that's what we're talking about, looking at and accessing the health condition of that church, and then find the proper diagnosis to deal with whatever the challenge may be. And the Bible, of course, is our handbook in terms of evaluation.
And elaborate on that, because you said plateaued out.
Yes, sir.
Kind of explain that.
Yeah, plateaued, okay, it's sort of like growing up. When you come into the world, you're a baby, right? And so you have to grow. And when you're growing up, your desire in life is to keep growing. And if you're a Christian, you're moving towards being more what God wants you to be. And so when we get to a point where we say, well, we stop. I'm not going to grow anymore. I don't want to do things in life that's going to better my environment, better my relationship, and growth in those areas. Well, the same thing could apply for churches when they are growing, they get to a point sometime where it seems like it just stops. You don't do the thing that you used to do. And so you may ask the question, well, how do I know that it needs that?
Right.
Is that you notice that the membership numbers start dropping off.
Okay.
You may have had maybe a couple of hundred people active this year. Next year, you may have 50. What happened?
Okay.
So that's one way you can identify if it had plateaued and declined.
Okay.
And there are many reasons. Each church is different, and I could tell you a number of stories about different churches go through different situations. No one is the same. But some indicators would be the church membership numbers.
Okay.
That's what we look at when we are looking at a church and saying, show us your numbers.
Right.
Show them in some Sunday school.
Right.
Another indicator may be baptism numbers. Baptismal numbers reflect how many people are coming to Christ.
Okay.
And you want to know how many baptisms
Right.
have you done this year. And if you say we have done any, well, you may want to know why. Are we evangelizing? Are we getting out into the
That's a good
community
point. I
to
like
tell
that.
people about Christ?
Right.
Another way you may want to know, I look at a lot of trends. American Bible Society has put out a report every year that talks about how people engage the Bible.
Okay.
And the one for 2023 says about 39% of the people engage in the Bible 3 or more times a year. Now, back in about 39% of the people in the USA from this study engage in the Bible 3 or more times a year.
Wow.
Now,
That's
in
interesting.
2020,
That's
it
an
was
interesting statistic.
48%. 2021, it was 50%. Then it dropped to 39. Now, it held, I think, 2022, it was around 39%. But that is also telling me if people aren't engaged in the Bible, then if they're coming into the church, that tells me they're not growing spiritually.
Right.
So that is a reason why we need to step up our disciple-making processes.
Right.
If you follow disciple-making YouTube, there are tons out there. New ways to study the Bible, new ways to
Right.
do it this way. So that's one. Then another reason you may see a need after the pandemic. A lot of churches, as you
Right.
know, closed the
Right.
doors, and
Yes, sir.
they're coming back, but that is another reason that you need to know, why are people, like I was asked one pastor, why do the seniors prefer watching the service online versus coming to church?
Right.
That is still a question that we're trying to address. The best way to deal with that is through assessments.
Okay.
And that's what we try to work with.
And keeping up with those numbers that you just addressed.
Yeah.
That's a part of the strategy. That's
Yes,
a
sir.
part of the strategizing.
That's right.
And
Right.
churches should be able to, when asked, churches should be able to give those numbers.
Yes.
And I would imagine that a lot of pastors that you
Yes.
encounter
Record.
cannot.
Record keeping, yes.
Yes. And all of this is setting the stage for, we are going to get into we're going to try to connect this conversation to distrust in institutions and how that relates to the church. But one more preliminary question before we jump into that part of the discussion. In the book of Revelation, there is the church of Ephesus that had lost its first love. I know you're very familiar with that.
Right.
How can that letter to that church aid us in this discussion about church health and church revitalization?
Yes, when you look at the church at Revelation, first of all, we need to identify who's assessing the church. Jesus Christ himself. So he is coming in and addressing the church from the pulpit to the pew. And he goes through identifying some of the areas. And one of the things he tells, he does that with all the 7 churches. And he starts out with addressing some things that he's observing. And he tells this church, and this was a good church. We would probably say we would join in a minute, but he said, you lost your first love. And then you have to ask the question, what is your first love? Well, for me, there are various reasons, but Matthew 22:37-40 says that our goal in life is to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, all our minds, our soul. Then we love our neighbors ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
It sounds like it got reversed. It sounds like they were putting the priority of devotion to God over something else. It didn't seem like he was saying there were bad people there. He was just saying that what happened? Are you still maybe the problem that exists today? Are you in my word? Are you praying? Are you talking to me? So he goes through and assess that church. So back, if you look at the bell curve, I like to look at it that when that church started off, Jesus makes the comments in Revelations 2:1-3, verse 6, and then that church started plateauing out. And that's why he says what he does, that you're going to have to do some straightening up in here. Otherwise, I'm going to pull a lampstand. So, so he goes there, and then it goes into a decline. Now, we don't know what the status of the church at Ephesus today, but back then when Jesus was speaking to that church, he was telling them that you've lost your first love. And if you were to go in a church today, you can almost tell whether a church has lost their first love. What's the Bible say? You will know that they are my disciples by the love that you have for one another. So if you go into a church and you don't see people loving one another, doing things for one another, following those imperatives in scriptures on the one another, it's over about 35 to 59 I came up with. And then, yes, that is a loveless church. And so Jesus identified that. And notice that he didn't look at numbers. He didn't say, how many of y'all running this Sunday? He just went into the problem. He said that, you've left your first love. So to me, Jesus was telling that church there's a relationship challenge with them.
Okay. Thank you. And now let's kind of shift the conversation, or that's a problem that I think everyone recognizes. Across America, believers and unbelievers recognize that we are experiencing. There is a need for church revitalization across this nation. Now, one way, in our personal discussions, it's apparent to me that one way you gain a lot of your data is through talking to individuals. So you're always gauging public opinion about the church through questioning everyday lay people, particularly. I know in our discussions, it seems that you're more concerned about what the lay person thinks about the church opposed to what the preacher thinks. Would that be a correct assessment?
Well, what I try to do is when I'm talking with people outside the church, whether they're in the church or outside of the church, I have one question for them, and that is to find out where they are spiritually. And most of the people that what we're referencing there are people that aren't part of a church. It could be someone that's coming to fix my AC, or somebody that's coming to do a job, or what I'm noticing nowadays, young people coming to the door and wanting me to talk to me about their faith, which has some doctrinal challenges. Right. So those are the people that I'm talking to, not necessarily the people inside of the church. That's a whole different atmosphere. So we have ministries in place to work with those areas, but it's the people outside of the church The people who say that I don't belong to a church, or I don't believe in church, or I don't want. And what they're saying is the local assembly, because when you look at the church, you have to really define what church is, and from the point of Jesus Christ as the cornerstone in Matthew 16. Now, what they may be referencing is, I don't go to the church building. Okay, I get that. Or I don't like going and doing church. In other words, I don't like going to the worship service. I just want to study.
The event.
The event, yeah. That's probably a better word. So when I'm talking with individuals, I want to know where they are spiritually. Because that's the most important. I want to know the condition of your soul. I want to know if anyone has shared Jesus Christ with you, and how have you responded. So those are the questions I tend to direct to people I meet, people that come to the door, and because I think, again, going back to the Great Commission, we are to go and make disciples, and so wherever that may be, it could be somebody, the guy that's working on your AC. You never know. God sends us those appointments, and so I think the church the local assembly has to be prepared to handle them.
Yes, sir. And what you said about the local assembly, and a lot of times when people say they don't go to church or they don't believe in church, you said a lot of times they're talking about the local assembly. And that's really what we want to get at. From your discussions with various people, what are different reasons, besides a spiritual status or lack thereof, besides that, what are some reasons that they give for why they don't want to be a part of the church?
Oh, wow. You got, how long you got?
What are the top 3 reasons that you hear most?
Well, a lot of people go to church to establish a relationship with others. We all need one another, okay? And through that, they find their way that God is what they need. And so if you go there for that purpose only, and let's just say somebody hurts your feelings, then sometimes if people don't catch those individuals, they'll leave the church. I know countless number of individuals who have left church all because of an argument or being misunderstood.
Very true.
And nobody was there to reconcile it.
Right.
And had we known, we could have, gone out. So we have a class that we teach at DBTI called Assimilation and Spiritual Gifts. And one of the things we tell people, say, get to know the people that are coming. Try to find out why not only why they are coming and what do they expect the church to give, but number one, make sure that they know Christ. Because that's where it all starts. So you have a number of reasons. There are some don't like the way churches do business. Some don't like the way they have this vision in their mind. And then some just have seen people hurt by churches. Some have seen all types of doctrine on the internet and YouTube, and they can't reconcile this. And so keep in mind the enemy is busy too. Right. And so you got all of this going on in reality, and so but what I always want to know, but I want to say, yeah, in spite of everything that you may be feeling towards the local assembly, what's your relationship with God? And I try to keep them focused on God, because that's really who your relationship needs to be. That goes back into the love relationship. You got to love God first before you can love one another.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the church is an institution, but before the organization of the church, or more important than the organization of the church, is that love, and love for one another, but love for God that promotes love for one another.
Yeah.
And discipleship is key. Now, discipleship, love for God, love for one another, that's all the message of the church. But I come across a lot of people who it's not necessarily the message that keeps them from church, but it's the institution of the church. And I think that people my age, for example, are not quick to subscribe to different things. I know an older generation, it was very common to be members of a bunch of different societies and organizations, but millennials on down, it's a completely different worldview, and there is no desire to be a part of any type of institution. And it's the fact that the church is an institution that keeps them away. I've even had someone to ask me, and he professed to be a believer. And this is actually one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had with somebody, because he asked me a question that threw me for a loop, and I had to go back and study. He asked me. He said,
those are the good questions.
Those are the good ones.
Those are the good ones.
He said, I understand why the need for worship. I understand all of that. I even understand why it's important to attend church. But why do I need to be a member of a church? Why can't we just show up and worship? Why does there have to be all of this organization attached to it? What are your thoughts on that way of thinking about institutions and organizations?
Well, I have to admit they do have some points there, because remember, I think in Mark 7, Jesus dealt with the religious leaders of that day regarding traditions, and I think sometimes we can allow traditions to override some of the work that God intends for us to do. Because the question that a lot of young people are asking, is the church relevant? Why can't we do it this way? And there's always this toggle that, well, we've always done it this way, but really what you're talking about, we've had this tradition this way for the last 100 years, and we're not going to change, as if it is something that is in the scriptures. And so that's where I am, and based upon these stats, if people are not engaging in the scriptures and individuals are not being discipled, because I think it's a disciple making problem, because that person is right in the sense that if they understand worship the way the Bible talks about worship, then they could be worshiping God. But they not only want to know how to worship on Sunday, they want to know how to worship on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And a lot of time, individuals not disciple on how to take the Lord into your day-to-day experience. Yeah, I believe that ministry, and some may differ, but I believe ministry, how we serve and minister towards one another, is a lifestyle. So it's okay if somebody want to talk to you about the Lord in the park. It's okay if somebody want to talk to you about the Lord in Walmart. If they have a question, then they should be free to do it. So, yeah, I think there is some truth to it, but dissecting it out, I think it's like on a case by case basis, because some teaching probably need to be done on both parts, both the church and the individual.
Okay, and I agree with that. I think that some of the traditions are good and maybe even correct, but something can be correct and empty at the same time.
Yeah, Sure.
Because I may be doing the correct thing, but if I don't know why I'm doing it, then I am doing the correct thing, but it's still empty. And I think that can be a lesson for the church, or at least the part of the church that is pro-establishment or pro-institution. And then, of course, there is another wing of Christians that are anti-establishment, anti-institution, and they do tend to be younger. Yeah.
I think they probably I'm not sure they're anti as much as they may have struggles with the regimentation.
Okay.
It's because when you think about it, when you go into a church service, there's an order of service, and it goes, and you're going to go through that order every week, and I think what may need to be changed, some things can be done spontaneously without being so regimented, and I think that's what I think young people sometimes say. We know what's going to happen next. We know what's going to happen next. We're going to take the offering. We're going to say we're going to hear the sermon. Then that's it. Then we go home. I think they want to say, but what's left after I step out of that door? What now? Do I just wait till next Sunday to come back? I think these numbers that points out to people engaging in the Bible is, if you are totally dependent upon the word being spoken to you every Sunday, you're not going to grow much. You got to engage yourself.
Yes, and maybe I just thought.
And I need to help you to do that. That's what the church needs to do.
And I just thought of I guess a way to explain. I've never thought about it this way. It's not healthy if I'm thinking I am a part of an organization that meets on Sundays. I'm a member of an organization that meets on Sundays. That's not the church as Jesus intended.
Right.
Yeah. And
right.
Yeah.
And I was gonna.
You can be a member for. That's one of the reasons I think we need to redefine how we look at church. Are you talking about the building? Are you talking about the church service? Or are you talking about the rock upon which Jesus built it? Because if you're talking about the church the way Jesus put it together, then all of us are a part of that solid foundation. And so from that point, we can grow from there. And if I don't make it to the facility, because a lot of people have their name on the church roll and it's been there for years, and so they may even have it there, I don't know, for a number of reasons, for the affiliation, but for not the participation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but I like those questions that individual presented to you. But
and I do have answers to his question. But
yeah, but
I had to work together.
But there's some stuff that I would have added to it, and that gets back to cooperation. But before I ask you something on what you were presenting, because you guys mentioned traditions, but I want to make sure we're not leading towards that legalism aspect. So when you guys are mentioning traditions in the church, right?
Yeah, they have to be evaluated traditions because Jesus dealt with it.
Right.
I mean, that was one. He would call it out, but he didn't say abandon them. He just called them out when they weren't serving a purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
When they were empty.
When they were empty. Yeah, he called it out.
Right.
So we have to be able to do that today. And when you are looking at a church that has plateaued and declined a lot of times,
right,
it's because, and I've seen many of them, where they have kept to their traditions and nobody's no longer there, and they end up selling the building somewhere.
Yeah. And those questions, what I was going to say is how you break down the generational viewpoints. And I think the older generation views the cooperative aspect and the fact where you mentioned what group was the individual in, you said?
Oh, I said millennial and down.
Gen Z.
Who
Gen Z,
kind of
Yeah, the 20s
That-
and the 30s.
a different focus,
Mhm.
whereas the older generations understood cooperative aspect and the fact of it takes a village, would you say?
Oh, yeah.
And that's
It all comes together if you really think about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It does come together.
it all comes
And
together.
I think that's where the glue is missing. Because
Right.
it does come together. And I think that is the goal to continue to study. How do we make that come together?
Right.
Question 5.
Oh yeah. Doc, all right, church, and I'm glad you mentioned one of the subjects. You mentioned the subject earlier, assimilation and spiritual gifts with DBTI. Church health is near and dear to your heart, as we know, and is reflected in how you lead DBTI. What are some other courses, you mentioned one that I said, what are some courses offered at DBTI that are relevant to church health, some courses that you may not find at other institutions?
Well, that was when we designed the curriculum. One of the things we wanted to do was create for students a basic theological background that they get in Bible school, but also be a tool to support churches in training leaders. And last spring, we offered a class on deacon training and roundtable. I mean, it was an actual class. It wasn't a workshop. They had to come to class. They had done homework. And we had pastors that sent their deacons there. And it was very successful. They did projects, and we asked them to evaluate the training, and a number of them said, we didn't know this, but you'll be surprised sometime that
You want to speak more into the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna ask
Yeah,
Evan.
I'm sorry.
Evan, you getting a good?
Yeah, so the training. How do you become a deacon? What does a deacon do? What is the biblical intent of that deacon ministry? So we did it from the biblical parts of it all the way to the hands-on.
Right.
We had people to come in, like how to do security as a deacon, why you should look, support the pastor, and what does that relationship look like? Another one is, we get this one all the time, church administration, and it's been my experience in working, and I hear this sometimes, is that nobody teaches us how to run the church in seminary, because if I knew that I needed to organize people this way, organize ministries this way, and I think a lot of times some pastors get in trouble when they don't know how to operate a church,
Right.
and then the pastor loses his job, all because nobody told him.
Right.
And I've heard that. So we have church administration. It doesn't mean that the pastor has to do that, but he needs to know. He needs to know what's happening in the church so you can lead the church. And remember, all of these training is all centered around the Great Commission.
Right.
We have to know how to make disciples by administrating how to make disciples.
Right. That's a good
The
point.
deacons, we go to that chapter a lot as the forerunners of deacons, and I think it's Acts chapter 6. And when they call those guys to serve the tables, there's a little sentence that is at the end after that the apostles list, and said that as a result that the work continued, it flourished.
Right.
So you read into that,
That's a good point.
they had, because of the deacons,
Because of the deacons.
the work, the gospel was able to spread
As a result.
as a result.
As a result.
Yeah, but if I can interject, everything that you just described,
Yeah.
deacons, that's a position.
Yes, sir.
Okay, administration, that is a necessity of organization, of,
Right, exactly.
of institution, and I think that what if that is what people, they want Christ, or they want the gospel, they want the spiritual aspect of it without an institution that has positions and an institution that needs to be organized?
Well, what I see in that, and I'm sure there's some other answers, every church should have a theology of service.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, how are you going? You take the Great Commission, you tear it apart, and you pick out the different assets. You know you got to do this. Now, how are we going to get it done? We're going to have to get it done through God's people.
Right.
Okay, so that's what 1 Corinthians 12 talks about. The giftedness. You got to go after that, fine, and that takes time and effort. That's why we're doing the assimilation and spiritual gift. But you have to have a theology of service. Some of the saddest news is when someone comes into church, how do I fit in?
Right.
In our assimilation and spiritual gift class, every person is called to service. Every person. From the parking lot to cleaning the bathroom. It's nothing too little for God.
Right.
And I think sometimes we give the impression that if you're not up front or if you are not in a certain area, your work doesn't matter. But your work matters to God. If you're an accountant, you are accounting for the Lord. If you save, whatever you do, you give it to the Lord. I always like to say, I love this story about the little boy that had the little lunch basket, like a carpet, and he had the fish, and you saw how Jesus took that fish and multiplied it. And so, can you imagine you receiving people into your congregation? You say, well, what do you have? Let's see if we can multiply it. That's what people want to see. They want to serve. So I think that is something I think the church could work on, theology of service.
And I think that answers a lot of the questions.
It does.
Because
that's a good point.
Being the people of God, being the organized people of God, is more than just worship. But a part of our discipleship is service. So developing a more robust theology of service. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say they all roll together. And as you do one, it seems like God has it all interconnected, service and worship. One of the best books that I read, a little book written by a Catholic monk, but it's so good, Practicing the Presence of God. And a lot of churches use that book. And the reason is, this guy, everything that he does, well, God got everything from the point of cooking. Well, God is in the cooking. God is watching me do this. He's always reflected back to his Creator.
And what was the title of that book?
Practicing the Presence of God.
Practicing the Presence of God.
I think it's.
We need to get that one on there.
I can't think of its name, but it's been out for years, and it's been used in a lot of Baptist churches, and we use it in our spiritual formation class because we want you to. When young people say, "I want to feel the presence of God," well, what does that look like? Well, it's a day-to-day experience. I had a bad morning this morning. I had talked to the Lord for about 20 minutes. So,
all the time.
All the time. And it just, and the Lord said, well, it's sort of like I needed that. I needed for him to slow me down.
Yes, sir.
So that I could.
So they can,
so.
As far as the classes, you want to point them to, like where they can find it, or you're gonna go over that later?
Dallas Baptist. Dallas Bible Theological Institute (DBTI). He was speaking of those classes that are very practical. DBTI.org.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, one book that you referred to it in your latest journal article that you wrote for us. By the way, that was titled Maintaining Spiritual Vibrancy in Church Health. You told us that one of your favorite books for this subject is titled "Can These Bones Live? A Practical Guide to Church Revitalization" by Bill Hennard. According to your assessment, what is Hennard's primary argument?
Well, this book is called Reclaim Church, and I bought a copy of it to hear. This is one of the books. We have a class that we're putting together. Hopefully, it'll come off in sometime next year. Leadership and church help, and so since that church revitalization is one of those topics that has not been talked a lot about, particularly in our community. So we decided to offer a class in it. And Bill Hennard offers a very practical approach to studying that whole subject area. Now, there are tons of books out there. I mean, you can probably find a library, but what I like about him, he's very precise. He's been in the work. He's worked in the church. He understands growth, plateau, and decline, what that means. And what I really like about it is he goes through life stages in the church. And you can probably, he say, what does a church look like when it's growing? What does a church look like when it's plateauing? How can you tell if a church is declining? So he puts some examples of what that means and what it looks like. Now, he'll tell you up front, every church is different. You can't identify and put every church in the bucket. That's what makes church revitalization interesting, because every child is different.
The individuality.
Yeah, the individual. Yeah, personality. Yes. Yeah, churches have personality, and each personality is a little bit different than the other. But there are some general things that we all can look at in terms of, what is your strategy? When you reach the plateau stage, what have we stopped? Is it time to call a church renewal? Time for prayer? That's where does God want to take us next? Rather than plateauing, because if you stay plateaued for too long, then you're going to start declining. Then eventually that doesn't mean you lose your salvation. It's the church institution itself will decline.
Okay. And we
Are we getting close? I can't see.
But we got a few more minutes in this discussion. Two more books that we want to share. One is titled "Upon This Rock: The Baptist Understanding of the Church," which I think is very helpful in understanding the discussion we're having. And the second, and I first admit that these two books are completely different in their approach to theology, but the second is "A Black Theology of Liberation," a very popular work written by James H. Cone. Now, just to briefly kind of sum up why I'm introducing both of these books, and both of these books can be found in the Warren Library. If you're interested in buying these, just go to our website, WarrenTheology.org, and we have a library of certain books. This book, it is a collection of different essays on the. It deals in ecclesiology. One, I think, very important aspect that of this is, me personally, I understand people's distrust of institutions, and I also understand how that has translated into people also not trusting the church. Now, I don't have faith in institutions, but I do have faith in institutionalism. And if I can quickly explain the difference, I do understand that institutions are not infallible, including the church. But The reason that I am a proponent of institutionalism as an idea is because God has created or brought together a community, an organized body of believers. And despite our failures, the value of the church ultimately is not in what the church does, but the value in the church is to whom she belongs.
Right. Agree.
And I think, if I can just put my 2 cents in this conversation about church health, a healthy church knows and understands that she belongs to Christ.
Yes, good point.
And I think that's this book is helpful in that area. And then this book, A Black Theology of Liberation, Cone talks a lot about theology being done by a community. And I think the church is a community that thinks on God and our relationship with God, that we are a community that has a relationship. And more than a relationship, we are a community that is in covenant with God. And so the reason that I want to be a member of the local church is not because it is an infallible institution. And it's not because the church, I'm talking about the local church, it's not because the local church does everything right. But the reason I want to be a part of the church, an active member in the church, is because I have an understanding that she belongs to Christ. Christ has associated himself with this community. And in the area of church health and church revitalization, and I think I want to close with that, and I want your opinion on that. How does the church communicate that to those people who don't want to be a part of the church, or those people who are not interested? How do we communicate that to the world, that we are an organized body of believers and Christ has associated himself with this body of believers? That's our value. How do we communicate that?
Can I throw a question in there?
Yes.
Because it kind of goes in line with what you're saying. How does a healthy church know that it's a healthy church? And it kind of pretty much be kind of what he's saying to you or asking you.
Yeah. Well, one of the when we look, I was thinking about your term, using it as an institution. When I think about the institution, the Bible addresses that as well. For example, in the pastoral epistles in 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, all of that is about the organization of the church, including the leaders, their qualifications, and the high standards that God has for his people leading the church. And one of my old pastors many years ago, and he used to tell us at that time as growing ministers that it's interesting that God doesn't ask for all of our qualifications. I don't have to have 25 degrees or walls or plaques. He's more concerned about our character. And I think that's what Paul lays out. You look in those attributes that he requires of elders and deacons and those qualifications. When you find people that are individuals in your church that exhibit those quality traits in 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, then it'd be easy to trust people like that because you're going to see their lifestyle. You're going to be around them. Right. One of the best situations I had, talking about coming into the church, because I was a deacon for 10 years. But I remember the first church over in Oak Cliff, those deacons took me in like I was their son. And not only did we work together, but we had talks. And so that was very important to me in my early, late 20s and early 30s. And I needed that relationship. So I saw the value of being a part of the church. And the scripture that talks about Hebrews 10:24, it says 25, you all probably aware of that, and says, let us consider how to stimulate one another. And that's what the church does for you. You know, when we come together, we encourage one another. I don't think the Bible put all of those one another's in there for, no, those are relationships. And I tell the class, every time you run across something that says one another, circle it. That's something God wants you to do. And so that in itself, if we can get not only young people, older people too, because sometimes they feel left out and not being a part. And so that's what makes the church unique. We'll never understand it and stand in, like my mother used to always tell me, keep reading the Bible, Leon. And so that wisdom flows into my spirit to this day. I can always keep hearing, no matter what, keep reading the word, because when you read the word, you will. The Bible says in John 8:32, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Yes,
and
sir.
I think once individuals, young or old, know the truth by discovering the truth, then they have a favorable view of the church, no matter, because they will know the price that was paid for it. The sacrifice. I always tell people, if you ask me my blood type, it's type G, grace.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Looks like we're going to have them come back, huh? We're going to do a part 2.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. Thank you for coming. Great
Thank
discussion.
you for having me here today.
Awesome discussion. And we would not be cutting it off if not for the studio's rules.
Right.
But thank you to our listeners. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion.
Thank you
with
for having
Dr.
me.
Moore, president of Dallas Bible Theological Institute. Thank you also, special thank you to our partners, Dallas Bible Theological Institute, the Urban Christian Writers Guild, and the West Mount Moriah Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas. If you want to join this movement by donating or becoming a sponsor, go to our website at WarrenTheology.org.
And we are also, once again, calling for papers for our quarterly journal. We publish on a number of areas within Christian studies. If you are a professor, seminarian, or pastor who does serious academic writing, submit papers, articles, and book reviews to our editorial team, which you will find also on our website at WarrenTheology.org. And until next time, thank you.
Yes, thank you and blessings.